November 54 Lima Alpha, the phone number when you're ready to copy. November 8 Lima Alpha, possible pilot deviation, advise you contact North Las Vegas Tower at 702.
The audio that you just heard was a radio transmission that I never thought I'd be on the receiving end of. No pilot ever wants to hear air traffic control tell them, copy down a phone number for a possible pilot deviation. So, have you ever had an unexpected encounter with the FAA? I'm not going to go as far as to say I had an unexpected encounter with the FAA yet, but what I will say is that I had a very uncomfortable situation with air traffic control, and today I'm going to share that story with you. On March 21st, 2024, I was on a flight with my flight instructor getting checked out in the DA-40NG. This newer generation aircraft has different procedures, checklists, and parameters, so it was essential that I got checked out in this aircraft before I decided to take it on my commercial long cross-country solo for my commercial pilot training. By the way, the link to that episode is in the description, so be sure to check it out and then let me know how you liked it in the comments. The plan for the flight was to do some simple traffic patterns and then finish off this entire flight with the instrument approach, learning how to program an approach into the avionics that I wasn't particularly used to. Does that sound simple enough? I thought it was. On this evening, as we entered the traffic pattern, I'm not gonna lie, I did notice that there was a heavy volume of aircraft on the radios. However, despite the congestion, I was confident enough in my abilities as a pilot to go ahead and continue this checkout, and I did have my instructor with me checking me out in this aircraft. I do want to put emphasis on the large number of aircraft on the radios. Although I thought it was a lot, air traffic controllers are trained specifically to handle stressful environments and handle a large number of aircraft. If you listen to LA Center or if you listen to the more busier airports, you'll see that air traffic controllers don't necessarily get a break in between talking to different aircraft on the radio. I'm not an air traffic controller, nor do I have any aspirations to be. However, ironically, my instructor used to be an air traffic controller, so if he wasn't phased, I wasn't going to be phased either. So we're in the traffic pattern, and it seems like everything my instructor and I talked about during the ground lesson before getting checked out in this aircraft is going according to the plan. We're doing our takeoffs and our landings, and everything is just running smoothly. I'm learning more about the aircraft as I'm flying it, and I'm getting comfortable with the handling characteristics of this aircraft. Now, when you're flying and you're in controlled airspace, you're being controlled by an air traffic controller, whether that's on departure or approach, or you're just staying in the traffic pattern, you're being controlled by someone. So every pilot's second nature is listening to the radios and listening for their call sign, just in case any messages are coming through to you specifically. So as a pilot, you can become very task saturated, but it's almost like second nature when you're listening to the radios. You don't really have to think about it. You just know your tail number or your call sign, and you're intently listening to the radios for your call sign. On this evening, I did notice that the air traffic controller was giving out a lot of traffic calls to different aircraft, and it was to help us stay deconflicted with one another, but I did notice that he was giving out a lot of them.
Western 1 traffic 12 o'clock, 1 mile northeast on Mercy Air, contact Las Vegas Tower.
Western 1 traffic inside, contacting Las Vegas.
That's the 456 traffic, 7 mile final, 4,800 ascending Lightsport. Lightsport 90 Mike X-ray, traffic 10 o'clock, 4 miles up direction, 3,200, we'll be turning out behind you, Skyhawk.
Yeah, looking for that traffic 0 Mike X-ray.
Although these traffic callouts are not an issue and they can be very beneficial in helping a pilot paint a mental image in your head and build situational awareness, I do want to let you know that it was nighttime. Usually when the air traffic controller tells you that there's an aircraft at, let's say, for example, they'll say aircraft 2 o'clock, 5 miles, same altitude. You begin looking at the 2 o'clock direction as if you're on a clock. You look in the 2 o'clock direction and you look out and you look for that aircraft to see if you can visually see it so that you can maintain visual separation with that aircraft. So the issue with this particular situation is that it was nighttime. Although traffic callouts, like I said, are beneficial, you're not necessarily going to be able to make out in very great detail what type of aircraft you're looking at if you are able to spot the aircraft at night. What you're mainly going to be looking for are the aircraft lights. So there are going to be 3 call signs that I'd really like you to pay attention to during the course of this episode. The call signs are November 987 Delta Alpha, November 548 Lima Alpha, and then November 490 Mike X-ray. Make note that November 490 Mike X-ray is going to be referred to as the light sport in this situation as well. So as my instructor and I are doing our traffic patterns, we were cleared for the option on runway 12 left. And we were told that we would be number 1 to land on runway 12 left. This means that the air traffic controller was sequencing other aircraft to land on this very same runway. That's nothing out of the ordinary, but I just want to let you know it's something to be aware of. The controller then proceeds to make a few calls over the radio and then gives additional clearances to land, as well as giving traffic callouts to other aircraft in the area, specifically November 987 Delta Alpha, the other Diamond aircraft in the airspace.
Diamond Star 7 Delta Alpha, traffic over Santa Fe for the parallels on Lightsport, and additional traffic Diamond will be in left base for the parallel.
987 Delta Alpha, I'll look for that traffic, thank you.
After the controller gives traffic callouts to November 987 Delta Alpha, the controller then cues me over the radio and says, November 548 Lima Alpha, do you have November 987 Delta Alpha in sight getting established on the parallel runway 12 right?
November 8 Lima Alpha, do you have the Diamond in sight for the parallel?
No, do not have the traffic in sight, 8 Lima Alpha.
November 8 Lima Alpha, extend your downwind, I'll call your base. You're now following the Lightsport over Santa Fe.
Extend downwind, you'll call my base, 8 Lima Alpha.
Now, I do want to put a pin in it here, and I do want to make note of something really quick. There are going to be two radio transmissions where I tell the controller either I have an aircraft in sight or I don't have an aircraft in sight. This is one of those radio transmissions. After the controller told me to extend my downwind and that he'll call my base, he then starts talking to November 490 Mike X-ray, telling them that they are now number 1 to land on runway 12 left.
Lightsport 0 Mike X-ray, number 1.
0 Mike X-ray, number 1.
Here's where I believe all the miscommunication starts. There's a radio transmission that comes through on the radio, and it's another pilot saying, we got that Diamond in sight for the parallel 8 Lima Alpha.
We got the other Diamond Star in sight for the parallel 8 Lima Alpha.
And I'd like to say this is where clear, concise, and correct communication is crucial. And it's what every pilot should really be focusing on, no matter how experienced or inexperienced you are. And out of those three, I think the most important is correct communications. Now, speaking of clear, concise, and correct communications, I will admit that I'm still working on my professional airline pilot voice. I don't believe I sound like how I would like to sound on the radios yet, but I'll let you guys be the judge of that. Moving along, that radio call was a woman's voice. And I know air traffic controllers are super busy and they oftentimes don't know who's flying the actual aircraft. They're just responding to whoever's talking to them. But in this situation, it was a short time interval from when the controller was talking to that same voice when they were talking to November 987 Delta Alpha. And now this same voice is using November 548 Lima Alpha's call sign when they're ending a radio transmission. Simply put, the radio call that you just heard was from the pilots of November 987 Delta Alpha. However, when they ended their radio transmission, they ended it with my call sign. They said that they had the traffic in sight, 8 Lima Alpha. And because they ended their radio transmission with my call sign, it indicated to the controller that I was the one saying that I had the traffic in sight, which is what prompted his response.
November 8 Lima Alpha, Roger, you're still going to be behind the Lightsport, 11 o'clock, 1 mile.
The pilots of November 987 Delta Alpha then come back on the radio and acknowledge that they made a mistake. They say that was 7 Delta Alpha, sorry.
That was 7 Delta Alpha, sorry.
But the controller never picked up on the mistake and never responded to 7 Delta Alpha when they tried to correct their mistake. The air traffic controller then proceeded to call my aircraft again and reiterated that we were number 2 to land. And then he says that we are cleared for the option.
November 8 Lima Alpha, you're number 2 behind them. They're going to the same runway as you, runway 12 left, clear for the option.
Number 2, 12 left, clear for the option, 8 Lima Alpha.
And I'd like to think that this is where things get a lot more muddy. Now, if you remember from earlier, the controller told us to extend our downwind and that he would call our base, meaning that he would tell us when to turn and continue our approach to land. He just cleared us for the option, which indicated to me that, okay, we're cleared to continue our approach to land. So as I'm making my left turn, I'm looking off the left wing, and I see that there's an aircraft lower than me, going the opposite direction, looking like it's on a short final for runway 12 left. I look at my 11 o'clock, and then I see an aircraft that looks like it's 6 to 7 nautical miles out at a higher altitude. The controller just said that we would be number 2 to land, so I think it's safe to assume that the aircraft that I see off my left that looks like it's on short final is number 1. He's sequencing us in as number 2, and the aircraft that I see out that's a little further out at a higher altitude is probably going to be number 3 to land on the same runway. Now, when I say I see these aircraft, I'm not necessarily seeing the type or the make or the model of these aircraft. It is nighttime. What I'm actually seeing, I'm seeing the lights of these aircraft. I know how the formation of lights look on an aircraft, so that's what I'm seeing. As I'm making my left turn, my instructor is being very vigilant. He's looking outside the aircraft and he's trying to aid me in making sure that we stay visually separated from any aircraft. He then asks me if I have the light sport in sight. I point out the aircraft off my left wing to him and I say, I believe that's a light sport. Mind you, again, it's nighttime. I'm not able to see exactly what type of aircraft this is. This interaction between my instructor and I is not being recorded because it's happening inside the cockpit. And unfortunately for this flight, I didn't think to bring any type of recording equipment because I didn't foresee anything like this happening. But I will let you know that my instructor and I are being very vigilant and being very aware of our surroundings to ensure that we don't end up in a dangerous situation.
Sir 245 Delta Sierra, traffic to follow is at your 12 o'clock, 1 mile.
Yeah, 5 Delta Sierra, I got all 3 traffic in sight.
5 Delta Sierra, perfect. Runway 12 left, clear for the option number 3.
12 left, clear for the option number 3, 5 Delta Sierra.
The controller now acknowledges another aircraft, November 245 Delta Sierra, and he clears them for the option on runway 12 left, the same runway that we are about to land on. The pilot of November 245 Delta Sierra then responds and says that he has all 3 aircraft in sight. Now, did he really have us in sight? I'm probably never going to know the answer to that question. And I believe it's safe to assume that the aircraft that I saw that was a little further out, around 6 to 7 miles away, was November 245 Delta Sierra. So if I've painted this picture in your head successfully, you know that there are 3 aircraft that are going to be landing on the same runway. Not necessarily at the same time, but one after another. You have November 490 Mike X-ray, that is number 1 to land. We are number 2 to land, November 548 Lima Alpha. And then November 245 Delta Sierra was just cleared for the option on the same runway, runway 12 left. Now, is that the picture that you had in your head? Because that was the picture I had in my head, and I was the one actually flying the airplane. Now, the next radio call that you're going to hear, when I heard it as I was flying, it was a little bit nerve-wracking. The air traffic controller says, November 548 Lima Alpha, are you following the light sport? He then proceeds to tell us that we're turning toward the light sport and that we need to make a right turn immediately. You'll see that on the flight data recorded from my flight.
November 8 Lima Alpha, just to verify, you're following the light sport, correct? You're turning towards them. Make a right turn immediately.
Making a right turn, 8 Lima Alpha.
Now, at this time, this is when I believe the miscommunication has fully set in. The only aircraft that I see is the one that I saw that looked to be around 6 to 7 nautical miles out at a higher altitude. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit before I finish the rest of the ordeal. One thing my instructor and I talked about when we landed and we debriefed is that he said I cannot be expected to follow an aircraft that I never told the air traffic controller that I had in sight. In fact, it was the pilots of November 987 Delta Alpha telling them that they had traffic in sight, but they actually used our call sign indicating to the controller that we were the ones telling them that we had the traffic in sight. The pilots of November 987 Delta Alpha tried to correct their mistake, but the controller never acknowledged it, and the controller believed that it was us, November 548 Lima Alpha, saying that we had traffic in sight the entire time. Now to jump back into the flight. The controller asked us over the radio if we had traffic in sight.
November 8 Lima Alpha, do you have the light sport in sight?
In sight, 8 Lima Alpha.
I reply and say in sight because the picture that I had in my head was I believe that the aircraft that I saw off my left wing was November 490 Mike X-ray, and the aircraft that I saw that was about 6 to 7 nautical miles out was November 245 Delta Sierra, which is why I felt confident enough to tell the controller that I had traffic in sight. But again, it is a nighttime environment and you can't really differentiate or make out the aircraft like I said before, unless they're a big aircraft like an airliner. Here's when my instructor takes over the radio for a quick second because he wants to try and talk to the controller and tell the controller that there was miscommunication and that we were not the ones that actually was calling the traffic in sight initially. It was another aircraft. But the controller seemed as if he didn't want to hear that, and he was actually pretty snappy about it. Take a listen.
Hey, Lima Alpha, there was a miscommunication on transmission. That was not us calling the light sport in sight.
Okay, well, I told you twice that you were following the light sport. Light sport 90 Mike X-ray, change to runway 12 right, runway 12 right, clear to land.
I changed to 12 right, 0 Mike X-ray.
Now, after hearing the response from the controller, I will admit that I did get pretty upset. And I got upset because it seemed as if the controller was trying to place all the blame on us, even though we were never the ones that used the wrong call sign. And I don't believe up until this point that we caused any miscommunication. But my instructor saw that I was visibly getting upset, and he was the one that told me not to respond to the controller. And I'm sure that if I did respond, it would have probably been an emotional response and it wouldn't have been pleasant. Next, the controller tells us to start our base turn so that we can start getting set up to finally land on 12 left.
November 8 Lima Alpha, start your base.
8 mile from starting base.
After he gives us the direction to start our base turn to start getting set up to land, he then gets back on the radio and what I believe starts to scold us. He says that he was giving perfect traffic calls, and I don't believe that these calls were perfect in the least bit, and I actually think it was a bit arrogant.
November 8 Lima Alpha, this is happening more and more often, you guys basing into each other after perfect traffic calls were given, traffic was called in sight. If you don't know who you're following, you need to let us know and just quit turning directly into traffic. It's very unsafe.
If these were perfect traffic calls, I probably wouldn't have any content for this episode today. And I probably wouldn't be thinking that the FAA is investigating me right now and I would potentially be in trouble with the FAA if these were perfect traffic calls. Because if they were perfect traffic calls, we would have never been in this situation in the first place. After the air traffic controller was done with his statement, November 987 Delta Alpha made another attempt to try and tell the controller that they were the ones who actually called the traffic in sight. However, the controller was already moving on to another aircraft talking to them, stepping on November 987 Delta's transmission, as you can hear.
Metro 5 contact Nellis Tower.
Metro 5, thank you.
Now, after that transmission, November 987 Delta Alpha tried to make another attempt to tell the controller that they were the ones who actually called the traffic in sight and that they were the ones who maybe caused the miscommunication. And then it seems like the air traffic controller still did not want to acknowledge this possibility at all.
And again, I understand there was a little bit of miscommunication, but if you don't know, ask. That's why we are here. Ask us the question and we will clarify.
7 Delta Alpha, the one who called the light port and both the diamond inside. I think you might have been 30 Lima Alpha.
No, I heard you. I'm just saying, if there's miscommunication, ask the tower. That's all I'm saying.
So, as you heard at the beginning of this video, the air traffic controller thought it was necessary to give me a possible pilot deviation and told me to jot down this number for me to call the tower. By the time I was done flying, the air traffic control tower was already closed, so I had to wait until the next morning to call them. So the next morning, I called the air traffic control tower and they took all my information down and they said that they would give it to the Flight Standards District Office, the FSDO. So after I got off the phone with the tower, I looked up the number for the FSDO. I called the FSDO and I explained the entire situation. And what I was told was that they're going to actually do an investigation, and if they find anything that they need to ask me questions about, they'll go ahead and give me a call. It's been about a month and a half. I haven't gotten a call yet, and I'm hoping I don't get a call, because if anyone wants to listen to the radio transmissions that I just played for you throughout this episode, I think we would all come to the same conclusion, that there was just a lot of miscommunication, and that all of this miscommunication cannot just be placed on one party. I think we potentially all had something to do with it. Every day I strive to be a better pilot and a better aviator, and the goal every time I get in the airplane is to take off successfully and land safely so that I can get back home to my family. I am not a cocky pilot, I am not an overconfident pilot, and I actually consider myself to be a very conservative pilot. If something in my gut is telling me not to fly that day, or if something in my gut is telling me something's wrong, I'm just not going to fly. However, if I do end up flying, I'm going to take every precaution that I can to ensure the safe operation of that aircraft. Being a safe aviator is something I learned in the military, and it's something that I'll always keep as my top priority. If anyone has any suggestions or comments to help not only myself, but other people become better aviators and to ensure that something like this never happens to anyone else, I ask that you please put it in the comment section. If you have any stories that you'd like to tell about maybe some run-ins with air traffic control or just some similar situations that you'd like to share, I would love to read them, and I'm sure others would as well. Thank you for joining me on this episode, and make sure that you hit the subscribe button, that you hit the notification bell so that you're notified whenever I drop the next episode. And be sure to check out my last episode, Flight from the Vegas Desert to the California Coast. See ya.